Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Two Way. If you've not been here before, let me explain the rules. Every time you miss a shot that your opponent makes, you get a letter. First one to horse loses. Plus, peace, love, and understanding. Plus, no smack in the chat. Plus, if you're here in the Two Way platform, please raise your hand. We'll have a nice conversation. And many of you are going to get to ask questions tonight if you wish. So I'd ask you to raise your hand early, often, and on a sustained basis if you want to ask any questions, because we're going to get to a lot of you tonight. Our guest this evening, the great Amber Duke of the Daily Caller, will be here. She's apparently on Fox News currently, higher priority than us. We'll take that up with Amber when she arrives. Anyway, Amber and I are going to run through the day's news together. And then a gentleman named Richard Farley, who's an attorney and has written a new book about New York City going bust or nearly bust back in the day during the Ford administration. And we'll talk about that book and its relevance for what's going on here in Gotham City now. I can tell you, spoiler alert, as a resident, it's kind of a mess. So again, love to have your questions. Please raise your hands high. Amber and I will run through the news and then get to you after we talk a little bit about the book as well. So joining us now from the Daily Caller, very talented, smart, Amber Duke. Every time she's on, I get emails and texts. Amber Duke is so smart. Amber Duke is so well informed. Amber, welcome in. Is my reporting right that you were just on the Fox News channel?
I was on Fox Business. Yes, I just wrapped.
Yeah, Fox Business. What did they ask you about over there?
They wanted to know my thoughts on Trump's commencement address to the University of Alabama.
Yeah. Have you ever been to the University of Alabama?
No, and it's on my to-do list. I
Yeah.
went to Ole Miss last year and I had an amazing time.
For a game or no?
Yeah, we went to a baseball game, and if I could go back
yeah.
in time, I would have gone to an SEC school 100%.
Yeah, Ole Miss is incredible. People say whenever they would say to me, "Have you been to X in the United States?" The answer is almost invariably, "I've been everywhere, man." So I've been to both Ole Miss and Alabama. Incredible places. I've not been to an Alabama football game, however.
That's got to be on the bucket list for sure.
Gotta be. I really want to do that. Anyway, thank you for joining. We love having you on. We're going to do it a little bit differently, Amber. You and I are just going to run through all the headlines.
Awesome.
And I'm just going to say a headline, maybe show an element, a video or a graphic, and you're just going to tell everybody what you think. All right.
All right, let's do it.
You watch a lot of sports on TV?
I do.
All right. So I'm play-by-play your color. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
All right. And if you want to rewind something, you say, let's roll that back. No telestrator, but the functional equivalent. All right. Here we go. Some confusion in the wake of yesterday's news that the National Security Advisor is out, promoted, according to the Vice President, to the United Nations, about who's going to replace him. Announced yesterday, Marco Rubio as the temporary two-hatter Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. Today, there were reports, echoing some reports from yesterday, that Stephen Miller was going to be a National Security Advisor. Now, some people were deeply alarmed by that. He does not have a lot of traditional national security experience, but recall he was on the Signal chat. He's heavily involved in national security already, has the confidence of the president. In some ways, that job is just about organization and administration and coalescing, but pretty much everyone who's had the job has more formal national security experience than Mr. Miller does. Not clear what's going on. Here, number one, Politico, in the wake of several reports about Mr. Miller potentially getting the job, says, in fact, not only does Rubio have it temporarily, but that the White House wants him to stay in the role short term, 6 months, long term rather, 6 months, and maybe make it permanent. Amber, what do you think about this Rubio Miller door number 3 aspect of this important job?
Well, it's really interesting. You know, the other name I've heard floating around is Michael Anton, who would be a favored pick from the America First crowd. I personally would be a bit disappointed to see Stephen Miller get the role, not just due to lack of experience, but because I love his interactions with the media right now, specifically on immigration. I think he's a really important spokesperson for the administration on the legalese surrounding those issues and pushing back on some of those narratives. And I actually think it would be a net loss to the admin if he went to NSA.
Interesting. You know, I've said this before, but I never tire of saying it. Stephen Miller, I first met him when he worked for Senator Sessions in 2015. And Senator Sessions of Alabama, was the first U.S. senator to endorse Donald Trump in 2015. And Stephen, who was a very top aide to Sessions, quickly became a Trump advisor. And I would ride in press vans with him back then. It's amazing to me. He's gone from an anonymous aide to a relatively obscure senator in 2015 to a decade later on the, being touted as a national security advisor. That's a pretty good run, Amber, for 10 years, right?
Yeah, and I think what some people have been bringing up recently that was particularly impressive was when the Duke lacrosse scandal broke. He was obviously a student on campus, and he was one of the first people to defend the innocence of the lacrosse players and start poking holes in the prosecution's case well before it was popular to do so. He took a lot of heat from his peers for that. So I think that kind of tells you that he's somebody who's willing to stand up against the tide or whatever's popular if he thinks it's right or if he thinks the facts are on his side.
Yeah. Amber and I could run through all the reasons, all the things about Stephen that the left detests, including his manner, right? His manner is, stylized, if I'm being euphemistic. But I think what people, again, one of the things we try to do in this platform is open the minds of people to things they may not feel or think. To just say Stephen Miller is like a scary blowhard, which is what people on the left think of him. He's actually a very smart guy, and he's pretty funny too. But the left doesn't see either of those, I would say. Okay. Let's talk about spending. Lots of things to say here. The White House put out its budget today. New York Times headline number 2. Donald Trump wants to slash spending to lowest level of modern era. And of course, Amber, they could say Trump supposes to save taxpayers, whatever, right? But it's the press, so it's going to be slash domestic spending to the lowest level of the modern era. Here is Russ Vought, who is the head of the OMB and really one of the architects of Doge. Gets all the splashy headlines, but this gentleman at OMB is the guy really understanding the numbers of it all. So let's play number 4, please.
We went agency by agency. We wanted to preserve the things that the president wanted to fund. So we protect transportation and infrastructure. We protect Homeland Security and give them a major increase. We obviously want to secure all the benefits for our veterans, make sure they have what's necessary for their medical care and other benefits. But what we wanted to do was to go through and deal with the bureaucracy that Doge has been deconstructing. And we've had concerns now for years seeing the Biden administration's woke and weaponized bureaucracy, which wasn't just about people. It was about the underlying bureaucracies there that had these grant programs that would push divisive ideologies into our schools and our housing and our communities, and also had weaponized enforcement apparatuses that were designed to go after the American people. That's what we're defunding. It's the lowest non-defense level we've seen since 2017. If you adjust it for inflation, it's the lowest since 2000. It's promises made, promises kept.
So here's what I don't get, Amber, and I don't have a giant abacus with me, so this is a little bit off the top of my head. Leave aside whether cutting taxes reduces or increases the deficit. Leave that aside. They're not going to touch Social Security. They're not going to touch Medicare. They're not looking for major savings for Medicaid, and even those who are may not get there. He's rattling off all these areas where they're going to increase spending, including defense and Homeland Security. They can't magically renegotiate the rates on interest on the debt. And that leads to domestic discretionary spending where, although they're cutting it, proposing to reduce it more than most, it just doesn't add up. There's no there for serious deficit reduction. So what am I missing?
Well, I think that's mostly right. And you'll hear from very limited government types and libertarians that they're actually quite unhappy that Trump is not planning to touch those programs that you mentioned, Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, because they think reform of those programs is absolutely necessary to get the deficit and the debt in check. One thing I saw earlier this week is that some House Republicans are talking about reducing the cap for federal reimbursement on Medicaid programs, which of course led to headlines that they're slashing Medicaid, which isn't quite right. What happened under the previous administration, and this actually started with Obama and the Affordable Care Act, which is that he allowed able-bodied adults who were of working age to get on Medicaid. Didn't require them to work, though. And then Biden actually expanded the reimbursements for those individuals pretty significantly. So what the House GOP is looking at doing is actually sort of yanking it back from those Biden era levels, which would have some pretty significant savings, but obviously not to the level of Doge claiming that there's going to be $1 trillion in government cuts. And I mean, the other problem with this too is that you do have a lot of establishment Republicans, kind of squishy types in Congress right now that are not going to be on board, I think, with a massive spending overhaul, because it would be difficult for them to potentially sell back to like a moderate district with a lot of Democratic constituents.
So there's a number of programs that are symbolic. And again, I'm for saving every dollar, but number 10, please. NPR and PBS, who the president, targeted in an executive order last night, say they're going to fight the cuts. I'm not really sure what they plan to do about that. But okay, eliminate NPR and PBS. It's not real money. And I'm not saying that means they should survive. But when you say deficit hawks are disappointed, like to me, this is a sham. Now, they haven't said what they're going to do yet, and maybe they'll find some pot of money. But even if they do all the things, even if they did everything they're talking about doing on Medicare, Medicaid, and make no mistake, as we saw this morning with Congressman Lawler on the morning meeting, there's lots of opposition in the House and the Senate among some members of Republican members to not do a lot of savings out of Medicaid. But even if they saved every dollar out of Medicaid for the biggest proposal that's on the table, they're not really reducing the deficit very much. So I don't understand why, and I don't mean this against you, it's just the whole conversation, the whole debate. People say, well, it's a debate about how much they're going to do. And of course, the rhetoric you heard from Russ there is, oh, we're not cutting very much. Don't worry, things aren't going to be eliminated. Like, if you're gonna say we're the party of fiscal discipline and deficit reduction, stop saying you're not doing it, and find some actual pots of money. I find the whole thing to just be a sham. They're not looking at real savings, even if they did everything.
Well, two things, Mark. I think, first of all, it is definitely fair to say that the communication from the White House on this issue has been very disparate among different members, different officials. I mean, when we first started, Doge had all of these lofty expectations. They started to pare those back. Elon Musk is now apparently leaving Doge in the short term, but says it's going to continue potentially until the end of Trump's presidency. And then you've got Russ Vought saying, well, we're not actually going to cut that much. And Congress, of course, has to do a lot of this in terms of the identified cuts through the rescissions process, which they've kind of been loath to do in the past. Vought tried to use it actually during Trump's first term to pull back a lot of foreign aid spending, and they weren't too gung-ho about that idea. So you have to get Congress on board. But the broader point I would say is that it's always been a little strange to me that this is the new sort of MAGA mega goal, so to speak, because obviously in the first term, the deficit and the debt were not something Trump was incredibly concerned about.
He doesn't care about it at all.
And I don't think it's even something that his populist supporters really care about that much. It's not something I'm as concerned about as other issues. This is sort of a Tea Party holdover issue. And to me, it's almost like they're getting into this lose-lose situation where they either cut too much and everyone hates them, or they don't cut enough and the conservatives and libertarians hate them.
Yeah.
For what end? So the way that I look at it is this: the White House should be focused on the symbolic cuts, because it is a very clear case to say your money should not be funding X program or Y program or this DEI thing or this ESG thing. But let's not make predictions or promises about any specific numbers.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, except this. And again, you said, Russ Vought's saying this, and the White House is this, and some members of Congress. It's all a sham. There's nothing on the table that's actual deficit reduction or fiscal discipline.
And they just introduced a $1 trillion budget for the Pentagon, which is mind blowing.
Correct. There's no reform of the entitlement programs because Trump doesn't like the politics. When of course they should say the Democrats want to let these programs die by not changing them. We want to save them. We're not trying to take benefits away from people. We'd hold current retirees and beneficiaries harmless. They're no effect. But I just find it also maddening. Trump doesn't care about it, and you're right, a lot of MAGA doesn't care about it. But then stop pretending like you're the party of fiscal discipline, or that this process is going to end in serious savings. I had Ted Cruz on my new show on the Megyn Kelly Network Next Up this week, and I said, what are the cuts Ted Cruz would like? Forget what the conference is thinking or what the chairs are. You're in charge. Where would you like to reduce spending in the federal budget? And he would tell you he's a fiscal hawk and he cares a lot about deficit reduction. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but I'm not doing it in a cartoonish way. He said, other members like Ron Johnson are worried about specific cuts. I have other things in the budget I'm worried about. I'll let other people talk about specific cuts, but I want as many cuts as possible. And this is from a serious guy who says he cares about deficit reduction. And that's to me representative. This thing seems to me, as I said, like a sham and a train wreck and a car wreck waiting to happen, because they could say, because of the politics, we're not doing entitlements because entitlements require bipartisan agreement and we're not doing that. And they could say, we're going through things like NPR and USAID that are not a huge part of the budget, and we don't know how much they're going to save, not nearly as much as Elon thought, but we think it's important to save every federal tax dollar. And then let's get through this and let's have a serious talk about saving money. But that's not what they're saying. They're pretending Doge is something it's not, and they're pretending this process is going to end where they're the party of fiscal discipline. I just think it's mind-boggling to me that we're having this discussion. It's not even close to the reality.
Yeah, I don't think this should be the focus of the administration. And especially when they tried to give the American people the perception that the potential cuts that Doge was identifying were things that they were literally getting rid of the moment they saw it, right? Like they kind of intoned to the American people, well, we found this program that's funding white Doge found it. Well, that's not really how the process works. And so now the American people are feeling like the administration overpromised and underdelivered, which is the classic axiom that you want to avoid.
And they're going to feel it even more when the budget passes.
And I think to your point about the politics behind this and touching the entitlement programs, I think the reason the administration is not making that argument that we have to save Social Security by doing this is that was what the GOP was saying from 2005 to 2016, really. I mean, I interned at the Heritage Foundation in 2015. They were obsessed with budgetary concerns. I interned in the budget department and about reforming Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. And they would always have this circular graph with the portion of the federal budget that entitlement programs make up. And they were making that argument. And guess what? It didn't resonate with the American people. So, I mean, they can't bring that back. It didn't work.
Hats off to the Heritage Foundation. They have been serious about these issues for a very long time. They're just not getting their way. All right, you mentioned Elon Musk. That's going to be number 8, Sam. Elon Musk was on Fox last night with one of his Doge colleagues, who goes by the unfortunate nickname Big Balls. Here is Elon Musk. All right, but Big Balls talks?
Yes,
he talked. He identified himself too.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, here's Musk on Fox with the Doge crew, including Big Balls.
United States Institute of Peace. It's definitely the agency we had the most fight at. We actually went into the agency and found that they had loaded guns inside of their headquarters. Institute for Peace.
I mean, any given company, any given organizational name is going to be kind of be the opposite of the title.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it was by far the least peaceful agency that we've worked with, ironically.
Of course.
Additionally, we found that they were spending money on things like private jets, and they even had a $130,000 contract with a former member of the Taliban. This is real. We don't encounter that at most agencies.
Yeah.
What was the money going to the Taliban for?
So it was a contractor. They received $130,000 for generic services. And to Elon's point, there was not actually a clear description of what the contractor services were for.
Now, again, I guess the folks at Doge don't think Taliban can be reformed. They don't believe in reform for the Taliban. I don't know. Just kidding. A weird thing. Okay, Amber. If you could turn if this way, if the Elon Musk and whoever's in charge of Doge PR could turn the clock back, what do you think they might have done differently to be more effective? They've done these 2 big interviews now with Fox, one with Jesse, one with Sean, I believe, right? The first one was with Sean, I think.
Yep.
but they've not been, their accounting hasn't been great. They overpromised and underdelivered. If you just take what Elon has said. So if they could start over, what do you think they might have done differently?
So he also sat down for an on the record with reporters on, I believe it was Tuesday or Wednesday night.
About a dozen reporters. Were you in that?
Yeah. The Daily Caller was there. I was out of town, but our White House correspondent was there. And she asked Elon, there's been a lot of chatter about Doge making mistakes, and you've admitted that they've made mistakes. If you could go back, how would you prevent those mistakes? And what are you doing to prevent them in the future? And his answer was along the lines of, well, we have like a 70 to 80% batting average, which actually I think is really good. But that, of course, doesn't make people feel really more comfortable with what has been happening. And I think the smart thing to do would have been to compile a comprehensive report over a period of time and dot the T's or dot the I's, cross the T's, and then release it all at once instead of being so trigger happy on X to say, we found this $100 million program. You'll never believe it. Here it is. Look at this, guys. And there's this ongoing thread of all of these programs. And then when people say, well, this includes this, or you actually weren't right on the accounting for the Social Security issue, they go, oh, our bad. We're going to actually pull back on that. It never looks good when you have to pull back on something. So take your time.
Correct.
Release everything in some kind of dossier where you have all of the information, all of the evidence that could be made public available to the people to look at this for themselves. And this is supposedly the most transparent administration in history. That's what they keep telling us. So it shouldn't be that hard to do that, I would think. Right.
Totally agree with you. So 70%, I was thinking about it this way. So if you do something at 70%, let's say you make 3 free throws, 70%. Pretty good, not the top in the NBA, but maybe Elon thinks 70%. I'm a very solid.
But Mark, you would foul the guy who was making 70% of his free throws.
Okay, so then you say, okay, let's say there was a Major League Baseball player who was hitting 700. Okay, that's
Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame, easy Hall of Fame. But let's say you're a brain surgeon and the 70% survival rate for your patients, that's horrible, right? So I think Elon thinks he's either a baseball player or a basketball free throw shooter. And I think a lot of people are like, well, you're a brain surgeon. Like 70% is not that good if you're a brain surgeon, right? Or say a student getting 70%, that's a C student, right? So I just think Elon's got a weird attitude about 70%. That's what I think about that. All right, I'm going to do some things. You can go as long as you want, but I think of these a little bit shorter, just kind of, like, let's say before you were doing your halftime commentary and now we're doing like during a play, NFL play. So you only have enough time before the clock starts, the quarterback's back under the center.
Okay.
Or maybe shotgun. Number 6. So the weekends with still more, the market up again. Somebody sent me a thing. Noah, is this true? The market is the Dow is now higher than before Liberation Day.
That's what they're saying today. Yeah. It's had the biggest winning streak in a long time, the S&P.
Yeah, but if the S&P or the Dow, either one, if they're back to where they were before Liberation Day, that would seem, by that metric, maybe the whole tariff thing's not so bad. Anyway, Beijing weighs fentanyl offer to U.S. to start trade talks. Addressing Trump team's concern over China's role in fentanyl crisis could let both sides soften trade stance. So this is a big issue between the United States and China, and Joe Biden worked on it too. As the weekends, where are you, not just on U.S.-China trade, but on the whole trade war? Are you feeling like we're unknown territory or getting settled or disaster? How are you feeling about it?
I think it's getting settled. The markets have recovered, as you just said. We also just got a really great jobs report, which shows higher labor participation rates, more jobs added than they anticipated. And also, I think most importantly, perhaps, the jobs gained were in the private sector while government jobs went down, which was the complete opposite of what happened during the Biden administration. They basically just created jobs by inflating the government bureaucracy. And I think I said this on this show the last time I was here, Mark, when we talked about tariffs, which is looking at what Orrin Cass has been saying about this issue, because he was sort of the ringleader of the tariff question when Trump was first running back in 2015. And his whole argument was to have a baseline tariff from the get-go, as opposed to doing the reciprocal tariffs, giving countries time to negotiate a period of 3 to 6 months or even a year, and then potentially ratcheting them up if countries don't come to the table. And now we're seeing that strategy is working quite well. Countries are wanting to make deals, even with the 10% tariff, which is much lower than they had on them before. And China now, after being very obstinate in the beginning, is apparently now willing to negotiate as well, which I think even more importantly than the tariffs on China, though, I think is actually getting rid of the de minimis loophole for companies like Temu and Shein, which is where they make most of their money.
They make most of their money there?
Well, I'm exaggerating,
a lot of money.
But it's a lot.
Okay, they make a lot. I loved your whole answer, Amber, but I'll point out that you did talk over the entire next play. Like, you were doing commentary while we watched it.
This is why women shouldn't be sports commentators, Mark. Come on.
There's some good ones. Okay.
I know, I'm just kidding.
I know you were. Number 9, Justice Department settles with the Ashley Babbot family. This, of course, the woman killed by a Capitol Hill police officer during January 6th. Noah, does it say in the story how much they settled for? I see they were seeking $30 million. So an unknown.
They've come to an agreement that they're going to settle.
Yeah. President Trump talks about Ashley Babbot all the time. Amber, do you think January 6th is still a resonant political issue for the left or for the right, or do you think it's no longer resonant?
No, I don't think it's resonant for either side. Since the pardons, I think it's kind of died out for conservatives. They feel pretty satisfied, I think, with Trump's action on that. And then on the liberal side, I mean, they've been talking about January 6th for the past 4 years and tried to use it as an election cudgel against Trump. And the amazing thing is the exit polls showed that people who were concerned about democracy actually broke for Trump. So I think that tells you everything you need to know.
Well, it depends what concern for democracy means. All right.
Well, right. It was a badly worded poll question, to be sure.
Yes. Yeah. Breaking news about President Trump and one of the law firms he's targeted. But before I tell you that, just show number 11, please. So President Trump mused on Truth Social that he was going to, something that had been raised before, that he might take away Harvard's tax-exempt status. And the president of Harvard talked to the Wall Street Journal and did an interview and said that if that happened, it would be highly illegal and destructive to Harvard. I don't know that the president would agree with the first or care about the second. And he had a great line last night. Did you hear what he said about Harvard at Alabama yesterday? Something like America's future is going to be written not by the Harvard Crimson, but by the Crimson Tide. Very, very poetic. All right, here's what just happened. So you got that Harvard thing, but here's what just happened. A federal judge has permanently blocked the entirety of Trump's executive order targeting the law firm of Perkins Coie. That's a firm a big Democratic firm, and I don't know what it means to say permanently blocked, because of course the Court of Appeals of the Supreme Court could overturn it. But where do you think we are in the president's efforts to influence, change, punish law firms and universities?
Yeah, I mean, on the point about the permanent block, I assume they just mean it's not a temporary injunction. But I mean, obviously there's going to be legal challenges to all of this. I don't think that's surprising to anybody. But I think stripping Harvard of their tax-exempt status is great. They have been openly violating civil rights law and Title IX for quite some time now. And guess what? If you, as an institute of higher learning receiving federal funding, decide to violate federal law, then you don't get federal dollars and you don't get to act like you're a nonprofit, especially when you have a $50+ billion endowment. But I think, I mean, just framing this larger conversation of all these things we're talking about, whether it's the budget and these moves to punish the law firms and the universities, Congress has been so slow to codify Trump's agenda. It's been entirely reliant on executive orders that are obviously going to be challenged by left-wing activist groups and liberal advocacy groups, that they've really, I think, been dropping the ball for Trump.
And challenged by some others too, not just those folks. Okay, I'm going to show Amber 2 more things, and then we're going to get to your questions in a moment, and then going to be joined by author and attorney Richard Farley to talk about his book, Drop Dead. So we've talked here and on the morning meeting about the quality of the digital work done by the White House. They started their own version of the Drudge Report this week. They make a lot of good stuff, and a lot. I say to people on the left all the time, I'm sure you don't like this stuff. I'm sure you don't like the content. I'm sure some of you think some of it's childish or whatever. But they're best in class right now. There's never been a White House that's done as much quality digital work. And so if you're a Democrat and you want to help your party, probably worth studying to see why is it so effective or artistically good. So here's number 12. Amber, you might need to explain this one to me. This is a meme. Pretty much when I hear the word meme, I assume I'm too old to understand it. But here's a meme. Not president, not a Maryland man, not real news, not Gulf of Mexico. Amber, how do you rate that as quality memes?
It's not bad. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, obviously. It's just
Even I understand this one.
Yeah, but what I like more than the meme there is the videos that have been posted on TikTok and Instagram by I think it's ICE or CBP, where they've been using TikTok trending music to play over videos of their vehicles rolling past the southern border wall or putting Trinidad and Tobago members on the plane. Those have been going mega viral and are really well done.
What does TikTok trending music mean? Just some popular song that's trending, or is that something else?
Yeah, so I don't have TikTok, but the kids tell me that there are certain songs or song snippets that will become popular on TikTok, and everyone will overlay them over their videos, or they'll be part of some kind of trend. And so they've been kind of ripping those sounds and using them on their videos. Got
it. I like when you say stuff like ripping the sound because it makes me feel like I understand young people. All right, here's another one. This is 13. This is a 24-hour lo-fi MAGA stream. And there's something extremely compelling about this, right? This is promises made, promises kept. The White House sends a lot of press releases out about that. And so it's just a scroll of... Okay, let's hear the sound.
It's music.
Okay. I can't hear it. I'm not hearing
The infinite loop.
Yeah. And they're playing it for 24 hours? Is that what you said?
Yep.
Okay. So Amber, I'm still in the business, and I have been for a long time, of trying to make high quality video products, often with humor. And I say there's three categories. There's stuff that's definitely funny. There's stuff that's definitely not funny. And then there's stuff that some people think is funny, some people think not, or funny or compelling. I find this to be objectively compelling. I find it to just be mesmerizing, spellbinding.
Yes.
Nothing to do with whether you like Donald Trump or not. Nothing to do with whether you think promises made, promises kept, or the substance of them. I just find it brilliantly done. What do you think?
It is designed to be compelling. The whole point of the lo-fi trend is that it's for people to use while studying or working in the background or even helping them go to sleep. It's supposed to be very relaxing. Some people meditate to lo-fi sounds. And so then putting it with the executive orders that Trump is signing it's very funny, but also, I mean, just very on trend. And I think the difference between like the camo hats of the Harris-Walz campaign and then the digital media of the Trump administration right now is that they actually have young people who are tapped into the culture doing this kind of thing and not trying to speak on behalf of groups that they don't understand.
Yeah. Brilliant. Amber, have you anchored any TV?
No, I've done a bunch of live radio though.
Where you've been the anchor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, who am
I kidding? I do The Hills Rising every Friday.
Every Friday. You anchor, but are you co-anchors, or are you kind of a subordinate?
We're co-hosts, yeah.
Co-hosts. So, do you do any resetting when you do that? Do you ever reset and say, you're watching The Rising on Hill TV? I'm Amber Duke. Think you do that, or you just introduce yourself at the top and then go through?
Oh no, we have breaks. Yeah.
Yeah, and reintroduce yourself. Come back.
I don't reintroduce I do on the radio, not on Rising, but we do say, stay tuned for more Rising.
Yeah. I almost never do resets on this show. Someday we'll be a podcast too, and then I'll do more resets because people can't see. But I'm going to do a quick reset. You're watching Two-Way Tonight. I'm Mark Halperin of Two-Way, and here's Amber Duke of the Daily Caller. Thank you for joining. Joining us in a moment will be Richard Farley, the author of the new book, Drop Dead, which has the longest subtitle of any book I've ever seen, and it's very clever, and I'll read it when Richard gets here. But in any event, now is time for questions for Amber. And as you've seen, if you've seen Amber tonight or you've seen Amber previously, really, you can't stump Amber. You can ask her about anything, even when she's multitasking and reading her phone. So questions for Amber, I might try to answer some of them, but Amber, really, they're for you. Raleigh, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you are and what's on your mind for Amber.
I'm in Austin, and I guess my question is that there's a lot of talk about how the savings from Doge aren't as high as they were originally reported. And I just want to know, like, do you all feel like that's really going to have a huge effect on voters in 2 years or 4 years? Like they're really going to care, or is savings just savings and that's all they're going to focus on?
That's a good question. I actually don't think it'll be that resonant of a political issue so long as the larger economy is healthy and performing well. I don't think people are going to get into the minutia of exactly how many dollars Doge was able to cut. The one issue that could come back to haunt them is there was that moment where Elon Musk promised people $3,000 rebates or suggested that that would happen. And if people don't get a check now, they might be a little disappointed.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll let other
Okay.
people speak.
Okay, thank you,
Thanks.
sir. Grateful to you for participating. Amber, you spend a lot of time in Austin?
No, I've never been.
Oh my goodness. Amber, it's one of America's great cities. I'll tell you three things about Austin. First of all, you know the slogan, keep Austin weird.
That's right.
Like thing. They had when I was there once, they had the best slogan for a ballot measure I've ever seen. Some people were trying to build light rail in Austin. And really, objectively, it was ridiculous because people aren't going to stop using their cars. And didn't have very many stops. It would be very expensive. So the slogan was, cost too much, does too little. Brilliant slogan. The last thing I'll say about Austin is, it is by my estimation, the fourth or fifth best food city in America.
Really?
The great live music. I think it's the first or second best live music city in America. But it is one of the best 5 food cities in America. I recommend you go. Love it there. I had one more thing to say about Austin, but I don't remember, so I'm moving on. Reynolds, welcome in for Amber Heard. Duke, what is on your mind?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So first of all, Amber, I graduated Ole Miss. So you really haven't experienced Ole Miss until you get an SEC night game and you spend the whole day in the Grove. So
yeah, that's
I don't
true.
count going to a baseball game as counting.
Yeah.
That's
so
fair.
you got to go to an Ole Miss game at night.
Yeah.
And that will change your life forever.
Reynolds, you're objectively correct.
I do intend on going back. I did drink bourbon at Faulkner's grave, which was, I think, a top 10 American experience, to be honest with you.
Yes. All right. So I got a couple of questions. First one is, and Mark, y'all were talking about it earlier today on the 9 a.m. show.
Yes, sir.
But for the Democrats, I mean, I think really the question is who does Clyburn, tip his hat to? Because I think he could whittle down the field to 2 people or just 1 person. So that would be the reporting I would want Amber to do, is go down to the fish fry and ask Clyburn, who's your pick? Because whoever that is, I would go to the poly markets and put a lot of money on it and call it a day.
Yeah. I mean, Reynolds,
real quick, does he do an open invitation? I'm a Republican, so I don't know, but does he do an open invitation to all candidates? Or does he sit there and say, I only want 3 of y'all down here?
For the fish fry?
How does that fish fry work? Yeah.
I think anybody can go to the fish fry. The years I've gone, there have been multiple candidates. The state party dinner, which he plays a big role in, typically will have 1 keynote speaker, unless it's a presidential year, in which case they will have many. I will say, we don't know what the calendar is going to be, where South Carolina is going to be in the primary process. We also don't know how many black candidates there will be, and they may split the vote, or he may not feel comfortable endorsing. But you're right. If you look at history and you look at the calendar, regardless, his endorsement would be more valuable than any other one if you look historically. But my spidey sense says it's not as sure a thing as it's been in the past because of the calendar, because there must be multiple black candidates, and because if Kamala Harris runs, he might feel obligated to endorse her for a variety of reasons, and I'm not sure that would put her over the top under the current trajectory.
I don't think he'll endorse her at all.
Yeah,
I think he saw how bad of a candidate she was.
He'd have trouble
He'll go for a winner. He'll pick a winner over her.
He'd have trouble not endorsing her because of the pledges he's made to her in the past. Amber, anything you want? Have you been to the fish fry?
No, I've not been to the fish. This is totally out of my wheelhouse.
I know this whole thing. I know this whole thing is a bucket list episode, but getting to Austin is super important. I don't know if the fish fry is always in the same place, but one year when I went, it was in a parking garage. It was like in a covered parking garage, and it was, I don't know, didn't seem ideal. All right. Yes, sir. Next topic, Reynolds.
Yeah, about the budget. If you just look at the interest and how much interest we're going to pay, it's going to be astronomical. I think the projections are in 4 years we'll be at $51 trillion in national debt. You assume a 4%, yield on that. That's going to eat the whole budget up.
And there's no way to cut that.
Yeah, not the interest rate unless the Fed buys all the bonds down at zero, then we become the Bank of Japan.
Yeah.
And then you have zero growth for 20 years, which serves no one's good. No. But I mean, and I'm a huge person in defense, but at some point, everything's got to be cut 5 or 10%, at least even slow the growth rate of down to like 0.5%. But yeah, no one's serious about this. But at some point, when you go to the electorate and say, hey, we got to raise your taxes to 40, 50%, that's where we're heading in 4 years.
Well, we're not.
So I don't know why.
We're not headed there because one party refuses to cut taxes. I mean, raise taxes. And I'm not saying they should. I'm just saying if Republicans control the White House or either chamber, they're not going to raise taxes. Again, I'm not saying they should. But if the reality is, Reynolds, I'll say this. The only way to cut the deficit and the debt is robust economic growth. That's it. Unless you take on Social Security, which they're not going to do. So,
if our 10-year yield goes to 9%, there goes our growth. Like it's not some binary choice. It's reality. I mean, I understand financials. I do numbers all day long.
Yeah,
and the numbers are not in our favor.
I agree with you, but you've got a better chance of making a dent if growth is 3% compared to 2%.
Yes.
So that's about it. Amber, your grandchildren are going to be pissed at you.
I know.
Right? Yeah. Reynolds.
I've been hearing that for 30 years.
Yeah. Reynolds, you got one more you want to do?
No, I forgot my third one. But China. Right now we're winning the trade war. And you can kind of see it. I know there have been videos of people protesting in China. I'm a big believer, if you're going to fight a war with China, I'd rather be economic because that's a war we can easily win versus a militarily one. So is it a case where the president sees that, hey, we've got the upper hand? And I mean, there's simple things besides the fentanyl. Making China be a developed country under WTO, that changes the rules. Like there are pressure points he can really put the screws on China. But I haven't heard of anyone changing the rules in the WTO of making them from a developing nation, because you can't be the second largest economy and then cry we're poor. Like, no, you've got to go develop status. And that changes what kind of subsidies they can give their companies. It changes what kind of tariffs they can put on other countries. It solves a lot of our problems.
Yep.
And I think that going through the WTO and forcing their hand on that front, to me, makes a lot more sense than some of the other stuff they're doing. But I haven't heard anyone talk about the WTO and changing their status within it.
Yeah. Amber.
Yeah, it's a good idea. And what you said about thinking that we're winning the trade war, I mean, what's the phrase, a hurt dog hollers or a kick dog hollers? The fact that they have all of these Chinese factory workers on Instagram and TikTok sharing videos of the supposed cheaper versions of the American designer goods, like the Louis Vuitton bags or the Hermes bags, and claiming that it's the same product, but in China you get it for half price, or you can buy direct from us and it's way cheaper. It's obviously not the same product. They steal the patterns for the handbags, but use cheap pleather instead of real leather. And most of those companies don't actually buy these products from Chinese manufacturers. It's all a ruse for them to try to inflate their economic importance. But the fact that they are doing that and trying to undermine American and European companies, I think tells you they're very concerned about what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not clear cut to me. Not clear cut.
Well, I mean, I'll make one other point. I'll let someone else talk. But if you look at China, like a lot of the reporters will say, well, China is not a democracy. Well, that's true. That's their strength. But also the weakness is, if you have 50, 60, 80 million people unemployed 3 months from now, you got a revolution on your hand. Like they don't have a big enough army to deal with that.
Maybe they've had unrest before. They're pretty good at quelling it.
But if China's taken over 200 million people out of poverty in the last 10 years. If you put 200 million people in poverty, you can't control that. You can't sit there and say you going from middle class to poverty and deal with it.
They're
not going to deal with it.
They got a pretty good police state. Reynolds, thank you.
Not that good.
Thank you. We'll see. Thank you, sir. Amber, you want to stick around and talk to Richard Farley, or you want to go enjoy your weekend? Up to you.
I'll stick around. Sure.
Okay. Amber, Duke, we'll stick around. And just a moment after this commercial break, we'll be joined by Richard Farley. Just kidding. There's no commercial here. All right, Amber, thank you. And thanks, Reynolds. And here is Mr. Farley now. Richard Farley, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Have to unmute.
Thank you, Mark.
Congratulations on the...
I've unmuted myself.
You have. Congratulations on the book. Are you on the road promoting the book tonight?
No, I'm on the road because my wife has meetings at Stanford for the library system, where she's on the board of directors. I get to float for the weekend, which is the ideal situation.
Got it. All right, now I'm going to ask if I'm having trouble with Richard's signal or it's my problem. Noah?
I'm also having trouble.
All right.
I'm having trouble.
All right. Richard, are you on the hotel Wi-Fi?
Okay, let me try it. Yeah, let me... I'll try another option here.
All right. While you do that, I'm going to set up the book. Richard's written a book that's a great account of important history about the city in which I live, but it's also got relevance for today. Again, the name of the book is Drop Dead, and here's the subtitle. You see the cover there, and you can see the subtitle. That subtitle is longer than some books, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. It's a great subtitle, and it's a great, I would say, gimmick, but it's eye-catching. Here we go. See if I can read it in one breath. Drop Dead: How a coterie of corrupt politicians, bankers, lawyers, spinmeisters, and mobsters bankrupted New York, got bailed out, blamed the president, and went back to business as usual, and it might be happening again. All right. So this tells the story of what happened during the Ford administration when there was real problems with the finances in New York. And the reality is that this city is rickety. Some consider the city in which I live to be just like greatest city on earth. And there's a lot to say about New York, but if you go on the subway or walk in certain parts of the city and look at our finances, although we're not on the edge, the precipice of bankruptcy, this place is fragile. It's a fragile place.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. It looks better so far.
Terrific.
We'll see how it goes. Thank you for doing whatever you did. So, Richard, I said again, congratulations. I ask almost every author the same first two questions.
Okay.
Who should buy this book? Who's this book targeted at?
Okay, I think it's targeted by two groups of people. One are New York City residents who are interested in perhaps seeing what the future might hold and learn from the lessons of the past. And two, anyone who's interested in Washington politics, because this problem, if it arises and all the pieces seem to be going the wrong direction for New York City, it's going to land in Washington's lap. So it will become a political hot potato because no president, even Donald Trump, is ever going to allow New York City to devolve into chaos where the police are not getting paid and the fire trucks don't have gas. Ultimately, Washington will come up with the dough. The question is, what will the conditions be to the money that keeps the city stabilized? And that, I think, is where the more draconian result is going to be this time around than last time around 50 years ago.
All right. So here's the second question, and I'm giving free advice now. If you're thinking of writing a book, fiction or nonfiction, what people are interested in are characters. Characters. You want interesting characters, folks.
Yeah.
So if you're going to write something, book, anything, daily story, character. So Richard, tell us about an interesting character in your book. Doesn't have to be the most, but tell us about an interesting one.
Sure. We've got a character named James Kavanaugh, who was Mayor Beam's best friend, who never graduated from college, but was a genius at manipulating numbers. And he could make every New York City budget look balanced, even though it was wildly in deficit. And his schemes are, for example, you can borrow against real estate tax receivables, right? A city's expenses are roughly equal every month of the year, but its revenues are very lumpy. And a big revenue is real estate taxes. So when Kavanaugh saw that the money wasn't coming in, he would send out tax bills to the United Nations, to all sorts of tax-exempt properties, and then use those receivables, because the underwriters didn't do their due diligence, to borrow money. The theory being, well, when that taxes comes in, we'll be able to repay these short-term bonds. And of course, over time, when the money doesn't come in, what do? You got to roll it over into another bond issuance. He would do things like, okay, we can't borrow long-term to finance short-term expenses. That's against the law for just about every municipality. But we can do things like deem 25% of teachers' salaries to be teacher training, an asset over the life of the career of the teacher, therefore justifying a 20-year bond to pay for teacher salaries, because that really has a useful life of longer than 1 year. So he came up with all of these games, and mayors of both parties, both Bob Wagner and John Lindsay and Abe Beame, loved it. Why? Because it allowed them to borrow when they weren't supposed to keep the spending going. And this worked during the 60s and really into the early 70s. Why? Because you had a lot of money coming from Washington with LBJ's poverty programs. You had low interest rates, and you didn't really have a severe recession until 73, 74. So the combination of exodus of high-paying jobs, New York lost its industrial base in the decade leading up to the 75 crisis, a recession, which you had a severe recession in 73 and 74, inflation, high interest rates, and cutbacks in federal aid. So that is the recipe for a New York City fiscal crisis. And if any of this rings a bell, you can see that these ingredients seem to be gathering in the pot a little bit here.
Yeah,
the first quarter,
50 years later,
we had a recession. Whether that officially becomes a recession, because we have two down quarters, time will tell. But the trends are not looking great.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Amber. If you want to ask Richard a question about the book, we're talking about the book now. Please raise your hand. If you have your hand up and you don't want to ask a question about the book, please put your hand down. Amber.
Okay, so I'm a notorious New York City hater, but what I hear often from my New York friends is that there is a certain level of corruption that one expects to take place in a major city, particularly in a place like New York. And so long as the trains are running on time, they're kind of okay. Where do you think the level of corruption gets over that red line where people start to say, this is actually too far even for us?
Yeah, look, I think it's right that there's always corruption. I think in the old days, it was a little more ham-handed, right? You'd have your idiot brother-in-law on the city payroll. You would hire connected lawyers to get tax abatements, and those lawyers would go out and raise money for the people on the city council, mayor's office. It was all a very blunt instrument. Now the corruption is very hidden, right? Because I'm outsourcing the task to a not-for-profit that happens to be run by the relative of a politician. Its payroll is non-public. It's a lot easier now to keep things under wraps. But is there less or more? I mean, in the old days, a congressman who was in the bag for Tammany might retire to a nice judgeship or a partnership at Paul Weiss or Shea and Gould. Now they've got $20 million in their trading account somehow and don't need a job at all, right? So, I mean, if you look at the accumulation of goodies today, it seems to be, even adjusting for inflation, a hell of a lot better than it was back then. Is there less corruption or more? I don't know. I think it's better hidden and more sophisticated.
Yeah, Amber, I'll just say, I know you make the trains run on time metaphorically. One thing about New York City, the trains will never run on time. I mean, like literally, the literal
I never
trains.
spend more than 24 hours there if I can help it, so I wouldn't know.
One of the problems in 75 was that the state had its own issues. And the fiscal situation of the state of New York now is even worse than it was in 1975.
Yes.
And the canary in the coal mine may be the Mass Transit Authority, which is why they push for the congestion pricing to try to get money into that authority, which has deferred CapEx and all sorts of improvements that they were supposed to do. They don't want to make the tough decisions like closing stations and layoffs. So if Trump wins on congestion pricing, that may accelerate and spiral very quickly.
Yes. Robert, welcome
and
in.
also,
Question.
They got a lot of COVID money, right? I mean, almost akin to LBJ's war on poverty. We had for 2 or 3 years massive amounts of aid in various pockets, including COVID, Build Back Better, Green New Deal. Now that we have Doge around, I doubt we're going to see those pockets of cash. So what blows up first in terms of a budget issue is something to keep an eye on.
Robert, question for Richard about his book, Drop Dead.
Yeah, what you talk about in the COVID cash, in our little city of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, that's very tightly accounted for. We're trying to manage that as best as we can in city council meetings, et cetera. But Richard, what analogies do you see between what you're describing in the book in New York City in the 70s and Washington, D.C. today? It seems like it's exactly what's going on with the NGOs and everything else that's being discovered.
There are some similarities. There are also some important differences as far as New York is concerned. New York in 1976, right, which was the looming presidential election year, the following year, was a swing state. Okay. In the previous 6 elections, the Democrats won 3 times, Republicans won 3 times. Ford could not afford to lose New York. On the other hand, he couldn't be too nice to New York because he had Ronald Reagan challenging him for the nomination. So he had a very thin line to walk here. But he could not afford to alienate either the Republicans in New York, who would have taken heat if Ford went too hard on the city, or the Republicans in the hinterland, who would flip to Reagan if he had gone too soft on the city. And if he went too hard on the city in the general election, which is exactly what happened, he lost New York City by a record margin. And only 2 other presidential elections did the Republican president do worse than in 1976. And that was in 1936 and 1964. Okay, so losing New York City cost Ford the 1976 election. But New York doesn't matter anymore. It is going to go for the Democrat no matter what happens. So you don't have to be nice to New York. And even a Democratic presidential candidate, assuming they get the nomination, doesn't have to care too much about New York. So that's the bad news for New York. Its relevance in national politics, particularly in presidential politics, a lot less. The number of swing congressional districts in New York, way down. However, the leadership in Congress from New York, the delegation is much more powerful now than it was in 1975. We've got Hakeem, we've got Chuck Schumer, and we've got well-liked and talented members of Congress. The delegation in 75 was thought to be crazy. You had Ed Koch, who everybody hated, Abzug, who everyone thought was a nut. So, not everyone, but a lot of people in Washington. So New York in Congress is very strong right now. And part of the problem they had in 75 was Manny Seller lost in 1972. He was chairman of Judiciary. And Hugh Carey, who was a powerful congressman, had obviously become governor. So you really had no one down there then, but you do have that now.
Right. Robert, thank you. Richard, I want you to close your eyes, okay?
Yep.
And I want you to recite the subtitle of your book from memory. Go.
Okay. How a coterie of corrupt bankers, politicians, lawyers, and spinmeisters bankrupted New York, got a bailout, blamed the president, and went back to business as usual. How'd I do?
You were like, you got about 70% right. You missed some word.
I don't control the title. As you know,
I understand.
You've written books. You have
you could. The only thing I've done, and I apologize if that seemed mean-spirited. I once, when I was doing my show in Bloomberg, we had a giant video wall, and I put up a picture of Mitt Romney and all his grandkids, and I asked him to name them all. And he literally has more grandkids than there are words in your subtitle. So you did just fine. Thank you for that. Again, the book's available now. Drop Dead, subtitle. Great yarn about what happened 50 years ago. And as Richard has said, extremely relevant to what's going on in New York City now. And it implicates all sorts of not just interesting things, but important things about relationships between the feds and a big city and the state and politics and law and everything else. So Richard, again, congratulations. Thank you for coming and sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Okay. And Amber, as always, we love having you on. And we always get a big reaction in the chat. And I get besieged by email saying, why isn't Amber the host of this show? or some other show on Two Way. So we're very grateful to you for spending another hour with us, and we hope you'll come back soon.
Well, thank you. And I promise I'm not coming for your job.
Okay, well, you're welcome to it. Thank you, Amber. And thank you all for watching and for spending the week with us. Next week, 9 a.m. Eastern time, we'll be back with the morning meeting, and Megan will be back, and Michael Moynihan. And there's some new shows coming. We've told you that for a while, but there's some new shows coming. Some are political, some are not. And we look forward to unveiling those for you next week. And pretty soon I'll tell you who I have on next up next week. A couple of great guests that I'm looking forward to talking to. So thank you for watching. Hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you Monday morning at 9 a.m.